If you can go to the next slide, Greg. Excellent. So today I'm going to give you a little bit of background info. Then I think I'm going to hand it back to Meg for another poll. And then Kelly's going to talk a little bit about who our target audience is and how they might use it. And then I think Greg Dillon is going to give us a live demo. So next slide, please. First, I'm going to talk about some of the background of this project. And I'm going to try to move relatively quickly because I think it's the demo that's really the interesting stuff. And so you won't have to hear me as much.
Hey, Frank.
So yep,
can I stop you for a quick second? I forgot to share the results of our first poll. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that really quick. So this first question asked, how familiar are you with the Wildfire Risk Community's website? And so it looks like the majority of people have visited, but they're just getting started. So I think this is a great place for everybody to be landing today. And I apologize, I interrupted you, but just wanted to make sure we could see where folks are starting from.
That's actually helpful, Megan, because that tells me that I probably don't have to spend too much time talking about what the site is, and we can spend more time looking at it instead. But so the site itself is a website that gives interactive data and maps to help communities understand, explore, and reduce wildfire risk. Particularly focused on maps because that's what we were asked to produce by the 2018 Congressional Appropriations Act, or the Omnibus Act. But we ended up producing a set of geospatial data information. So it's more than maps. It's the tools you might need to make the maps. And so there's maps, there's data and tables. Anyway, we did this project because of Congress put it in the act that we were going to, and when they gave us 2 years to get it completed. We used nationwide, sorry, maps are nationwide, and the data is consistent, and we use the same data and consistent methods throughout the entire nation, all 50 states, including Alaska and Hawaii. The data set is searchable by community, by county, or by state, and the scale is variable. If you search for community, you'll see it within the state. And if you search by state, you'll see it compared to the rest of the nation. We published
Frank,
this
Frank, your audio is kind of coming in a little choppy, and I'm wondering, I don't know if we should try through your computer because I know you're on your phone, right?
Yeah, I have to switch over to computer mode, but I can try that.
Yeah, it was weird. It worked when we did our sound check, so I don't know what the deal is. Sorry, folks. Thanks for hanging with us right now.
I switched over to computer audio. Is that better?
Yeah, I think it sounds better for me. I don't know if folks can let us know in the chat window. Sorry to keep interrupting you.
No, that's all right. I'm getting all these little notices where people are putting in stuff in the chat room too, so I'm getting plenty distracted. So yeah, we published this about 6 weeks ago on April 9th, and in the first month, I think it's been well received. Go to the next slide, please, Craig. I did want to take a moment to point out that we're building on the work of others and trying to incorporate the best available science and data. I particularly wanted to point out the Rocky Mountain Research Station. The large fire simulator is a big part of what we were able to do, and the General Technical Report 315, which talked about how to do wildfire risk assessment, is a big part of what enabled us to be able to do this. But my main plug here is for Landfire, because as I mentioned, I've got a foot in that world and a foot in this other world. And we could not have done this without the Landfire data. It's really the only data that spans all lands and all states, and gives us that depth and breadth of information that we needed. We used Landfire 2014 because that's the only set that's available for all states right now. But if you haven't used Landfire data lately, you're in for a treat. We're about 3/4 of the way maybe done with producing Landfire 2016. And this is a complete remap of the base layer, Landfire 2.0. And I think you'll find it's a significant upgrade from the previous versions of Landfire. So we're very pleased with the results. We'll be delivering the Northeast area in the next, I don't know, 4 to 6 to 8 weeks. And that'll complete the lower 48 states. And then we'll be working on Alaska and Hawaii. Please to the next slide. So back to wildfire risk to communities. Its intention, its purpose is to help communities learn about their risk profile, the nature and effects of their risk, and what actions they might take to mitigate the risk. I think those words are directly from the Omnibus Act. We had to interpret those a little bit to make it something we could do. But we believe that it will help the communities prioritize their mitigation efforts within the state or the county and identify which communities more effort is needed, and then link to the resources that can help them mitigate that risk. That wasn't required in the Act, but we felt that was important. The target audience is these community leaders, such as mayors, county commissioners, town planners, fire marshals, that sort of people. And so that's what is represented by those icons. And when Kelly talks, she'll be talking directly about how those people might use this. That doesn't mean that the site isn't useful to others. I think there are some pieces of the site that are useful to homeowners, some pieces that'll be useful for state managers, and some even for federal managers. Next slide, please. The timeline. So we started talking about this back in 2018 after the Act passed. But this timeline just sort of shows what happened in 2020. So we spent a lot of time in February and March getting ready and putting up the website. In April, we launched the website, but we really weren't able to do everything that we wanted to do. We had a deadline in the Congressional Act of getting it done. So there are some additional data and some enhancements that we hope to add over the course of the summer, and probably have a second public launch in August or so. That's not required by the Act, but it's some stuff that we think will be useful to the user. Next slide, please. This is a team effort. And I just wanted to point out some of the folks that worked on this, and the team built over time. Initially, the Act required the Secretary of Agriculture to have the Forest Service chief work on this. And so, of course, it bubbled down to the Fire and Aviation Unit. But we quickly realized we didn't have all the resources. And so we contacted the Rocky Mountain Research Station. And we worked on it for a little while, but pretty soon we realized that the data ask was much bigger than we could handle. And so we recruited the folks at Pyrologics, Joe Scott and his team. And you see them there in the Zoom slides. And they helped with the gathering the data, which was a big lift. Mostly they were able to complete the data by, I think, December of 2019. And then we started realizing that there was another big lift where we had to stand up a website to present this data in a fashion that was useful to our target audience. And that's where Headwaters Economics really came into help. They're really good at communicating with the public. We have a long history of working with them, and they've been invaluable. It took these 3 legs of the triangle in order to get this stood up. Next slide, please. So I just want to make a few points about what the site is and what it isn't. So on the left, we use nationally consistent data and processes and risk metrics. So the data is comparable from city to city, from county to county, and from state to state. The data is available nationwide, all 50 states, in communities, counties, and states. We use the census designated places. So there may be a few communities that didn't make it into the census designated place, but you're going to find most of the communities you can imagine. We wanted to be grounded in the best available science. Sometimes that meant taking what was best available at the scale that we were working, but I think we were able to do that. And I'll let you judge for yourselves whether we were easy to use and whether we appropriately included resources for action, but that was certainly our intent. On the right, I want to caution you that this is not a fine scale analysis. It's really better for comparing community A with community B, rather than neighborhood A and neighborhood B. And it's really not intended to zoom in on your house and see what your fire risk is there. And part of the reason for that is it's not locally calibrated. There's a lot of variation and information that's available at the local scale that we just don't have nationally and couldn't be done at a national project. It's not a predictive project. And what I mean by that is it's not like predictive services, and it doesn't tell you what the fire season is going to be like in 2020. And it doesn't include climate projections. So I can't tell you what the fire season is going to be like in 2030. It's probabilistic, and it's based on the data we have and historic experiences. And maybe most important is it's not a replacement for other assessments. There are a lot of assessments already out there, particularly at the state level, and those are really good and they serve their purposes. We don't have the capacity to do the kind of in-depth analysis that those other assessments have done. What this may be able to help is to compare between two assessments. So you've got an assessment in one state and another state, but they use slightly different parameters. This may give you a crosswalk to compare one with the other. Next slide, please. So when you get to the website, this is the landing page. On this landing page, there's three icons. I like to think of them as pathways. The first one is understand risk. And this gives the user a chance to get into the terminology and the components of risk and see how they're calculated. And I think it helps to understand risk if you want to reduce the risk. In the middle icon, you get an opportunity to explore the risk at that county, community, or statewide scale. And you can zoom in and move around in the interactive maps. And that's probably the coolest part of the website, but it may not be the most important. I think the third icon may be the most important part of the website. And this is where you get access to, there's a number of icons you'll be able to follow, and Kelly will show you that. You get access to different tools and resources that can help you mitigate the risk at both the homeowner scale, the community scale, and then the larger landscape scale. And with that, next slide, please. I think Megan has another poll that we're going to do, and then Kelly's going to take over.
Yep. There should be a poll on your screen. Please go ahead and take that right now. There's 174 folks in the meeting room, and so lots of opinions and lots of reasons for joining our webinar today. I wanted to mention while people are taking this poll that if you have questions, please put them in the chat window. Kelly and all of the other co-hosts and I will be monitoring those questions, and so we want to make sure that we're grabbing them, and we'll be having time to address them at the end. So let's leave the poll open for about 10 more seconds. Please go ahead and let us know your thoughts, and then I'll share the results and we can go from there. All right. Votes are still coming in, so I'm going to give it a second. And one other thing I wanted to mention, that this webinar is being recorded and it's live on our YouTube page. So the recording will be available immediately. So you can watch it if you missed something today, and don't worry about having to take studious notes. So can you see the results, Kelly?
I can, yeah. This is great. It looks like we've got a pretty equal distribution of folks that are interested in understanding the components of risk and exploring risk data for their community, reducing risk, and building political will. So the good news is the site can help do all of those things, and I'm excited to share with you a little bit about how different audiences might apply the tool and the website. When I'm done, oh, go ahead, Megan.
Your audio sounds a little wonky too, so I'll just let you talk for a little bit, and if I check back in, I apologize for interrupting you, but we'll see. Maybe it'll even out in a minute.
Okay. Keep me posted. As I said, I'll give a little bit of an explanation of audiences and potential applications for the site, and I'll go kind of quickly because we want to cut right to the chase, which is the live demonstration that Greg will lead when I'm done. So first, I wanted to point out that this risk assessment is a little different than some others you've likely worked with. Greg, you can go to the next slide. Because for this risk assessment, our focus is really on communities, on homes, in fact. So we have approximated the location of homes from population data and from land scan. Greg, you can advance. And we have also assumed generalized susceptibility for all homes. So in other words, we have assumed that given a certain fire intensity, any home would be damaged or destroyed. So we're not accounting for, and we don't have the capacity in a national scale project like this, to account for individual homes that may have been mitigated. And this also means that because of our focus on homes, we haven't accounted for other values or resources that might be impacted by wildfire. Things like operational or response issues, watershed health, and critical infrastructure. Obviously, these are really important considerations that are related to wildfire on landscape scales, but they simply aren't the focus of this project. Next slide, Greg. But with fully 1/3 of homes in the United States in the wildland urban interface, we have a big challenge ahead of us. The wildland urban interface is the fastest growing land use type in the nation, and the wildfire danger is increasing because of that growth. Today, we spend an average of $3 billion per year on federal fire suppression in the United States, and a significant portion of those costs are from protecting homes and communities. Wildland urban interface disasters are growing in scale and intensity. And that $3 billion number is huge, but the reality is that suppression accounts for just 9% of total disaster costs. In WUI disasters, the long-term costs and damages can be more than 10 times the cost of suppression. This is things like the loss of property values, business and property tax revenue, long-term watershed and forest rehabilitation. And communities are often disrupted for years after a disaster. And of course, next slide, please. Those numbers belie the true costs of disasters. We're talking about people, their lives, and their livelihoods. The good news, next slide, please, is that we know a lot about how to reduce wildfire risk. And that's one of the places where this tool comes in. As Frank mentioned, one of the pathways for wildfire risk to communities is to help provide resources and partnerships for ways to reduce risk. We wanted to provide not just data about where risk is distributed across the landscape, but also ways that you can take action in your community to reduce risk. And that's why one of the focus points of this tool is on local communities, and why the primary audience for this tool is in fact community leaders at the local level. We're talking about land use planners, fire managers, elected officials. And I want to walk you through a couple of examples of how different audiences might be able to apply the resources in this tool, starting with the land use planner. Land use planners are responsible for developing plans and enacting regulations across communities, and they might need to understand where to include wildfire in codes, plans, and regulations, how to think about new development proposals in the context of wildfire. And because land use planners aren't necessarily experts in wildfire, in fact, they have to consider all other natural hazards, they might need resources to help support their team. So for example, next slide, these maps and resources can help land use planners consider things like where in their county or their jurisdiction they should include wildfire in things like the comprehensive plan or community codes. For example, if you're updating your comprehensive plan or your zoning regulations, maps of wildfire hazard could be very helpful. If you're reviewing new developments, these tools can be a starting point for understanding and asking more detailed questions, collaborating perhaps with fire departments or land managers to get a better understanding of wildfire risk. It might help land use planners understand where things like building codes or different regulations for ingress and egress might be necessary. Another potential user of this tool, of course, are fire managers, local fire chiefs, and others who are in charge of response and prevention. Fire chiefs and fire managers will want to know where there might be potential impact, where wildfire is more likely across their jurisdiction or their community, what kinds of mitigation efforts are going to be most effective given the conditions on the landscape, and then what kind of tools are available to help educate the public and constituents. So one of the really unique features of this tool is something that Greg will demonstrate in a minute, and that is that we've been able to map where different intensities of wildfire might occur, different exposure types. So we've taken into consideration the spread of embers into communities and where you might need to be thinking about and mitigating for the risk of embers on the landscape. This image is from the Sleepy Hollow fire in Wenatchee, where embers traveled from the wildlands outside of town into downtown Wenatchee and caught some industrial warehouses on fire right in the heart of downtown Wenatchee. Another potential audience is elected officials, such as county commissioners. These really important stakeholders have important decisions to make about how to prioritize resources across their jurisdiction. And they need to understand, in order to do that, where the risk is greatest, not only from a landscape and wildfire perspective, but also from a community perspective. Where are people most vulnerable? And they're going to need to make sure that they're getting the right tools and resources to their staffs and departments to help those departments make sure that they've got the resources to help the community and the public. So these maps can help elected officials understand where risk might be greatest in their jurisdiction, comparing from community to community, where people might be made more vulnerable because of socioeconomic or health factors, and therefore have a direct and prioritized staff resources. Next slide, Greg. These tools can also help make sure that they're providing their teams with resources to help the public. And because of the reduce risk section on this website, which Greg will show you in a minute, there are a lot of links to tools and partnerships that can help communities leverage the resources they have and tap into networks and partnerships that can help expand the resources in individual communities. Next slide. So with that, I'll hand it over to Greg, who will demonstrate the tool and show you how some of these different pages in the website might be used.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we got you loud and clear. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. And I'm on computer audio, so please let me know. Hopefully you can hear me all right as I go through, but we're going to try, like Kelly said, to give you a little bit of a live demo of the website and walk you through some of those use cases that she just gave examples of. So let's see, I'm going to escape out of here and we're going to go to the website. There we go. And so expand that. This is our Wildfire Risk Communities website. And Frank showed you a screenshot of this homepage before. It's got these three icons on the main page that are your lead in to everything that the website has to offer. There are also menu options up along the top, a little bit of information about some FAQs, other information about how we tie to federal policies like the cohesive strategy. But what I'm going to do is talk you through the different pieces of the website and particularly spend a little bit of time in the Explore tool. But just to be thorough in terms of how we walk through this, this is the Understand Risk page. And as Frank said earlier, it's a way to get into the terminology that we use to talk about wildfire risk. And so we're building all of this on the best available science. There's about 15 years worth of literature on applying risk management concepts to wildfire and wildfire risk assessments that started with a paper from Mark Finney in 2005 and has ballooned since then. And so we conceptualize risk by combining components of hazard and vulnerability. So you'll see throughout the website these icons of the different subcomponents: likelihood, intensity, exposure, and susceptibility, that we use to talk about how we're conceptualizing risk, and then also how people can go about reducing their risk by addressing particular components that make up risk. So on this page, you get information about each of those components, a little bit of information about which elements in the Explore tool and the Reduce pathway will help you to address that component. And I'm going to keep scrolling down here so we can see that towards the bottom of this, it's going to direct you towards more resources if you want to know more information about the science behind all of this. And this is just the beginning. We have citations throughout the website, but I wanted to point that out. So I'm going to go back to our homepage here, and we will jump into the Explore tool for a little while. So when you go there, you get this page with a search box, and you can type in a community name. As Frank said, we have included all communities that are part of the Census Bureau's populated places data set. So that includes incorporated cities, as well as unincorporated census designated places. So for this demonstration, we're going to go check out Boise, Idaho. And so you can see when I start to type, it's going to match things with my typing. And then I have to select my choice. In this case, I want to choose Boise City instead of the county of Boise. And so we're going to go click on that and give it a second to load up here. But what you see is an interactive web page that's got two pieces to it. On the left side, we have an interactive chart that is giving us a plot of where communities in this state that we've searched. So here we've searched a community in Idaho. We're looking at a comparison of communities in the state of Idaho on two axes. One is the likelihood of fire at any place within that landscape within a given year. And so the places on the right side are the communities that have the highest likelihood of wildfire. Then on the vertical axis of this chart is the wildfire consequence. And so that's where we apply that generalized concept of susceptibility, or what we call a response function that quantifies in a very general way what percent of damage a home might receive under different intensities of wildfire. And so the places at the upper parts of the graph have the highest potential wildfire consequences if they experience a fire. And so the combination of those two, a high probability and a place that would have high consequences, results in high risk. And these are expressed in terms of average risk and not overall risk. And I'll make that point a little bit later when we dive into the data a little deeper. But what we can see here is, as I move around, you're seeing these little tooltips or pop-ups come up that tell us the percentile rating for every community within the state of Idaho. The dots are sized according to population, and so Boise City is the largest dot on here. And when I hover over it, it tells me it's at the 74th percentile. You can see in the statement above, it's also telling us populated areas in Boise City have on average greater risk than 74% of communities in Idaho. And so one important piece of that is populated areas. We're only doing those summary statistics for the parts of the community where housing density exists, where we have current housing density. You'll also notice that a lot of terms in here are underlined. And so if I click on an underlined term, it's going to pop up a little window that gives me a very short definition. I'll click on risk to homes here, and we can see it says risk to homes integrates wildfire likelihood and intensity with generalized consequences to a home everywhere on the landscape. But if I want to know more than that, I can click on the glossary, and it's going to bring this up over here. And your little video feed from Zoom may be covering this, so you can move that if you need to. But this will give you a more in-depth definition of what we mean by risk to homes. And here we say it poses the hypothetical question, what would be the relative risk to a house if one existed here? It asks that question whether a home actually exists at that location or not. And so that's important. I'll demonstrate that with the map here in just a minute. But you get a full explanation. And then also, again, I noticed the icons that I talked about. Our risk to homes is accounting for likelihood, intensity, and susceptibility. We're not directly pulling in exposure, which is the overlap of homes with places that have hazard, because we're showing this across the whole landscape. And let's take a look at what that means. So moving to the map side of the web page, I can interact with this. I can grab it and pan around. I can use my mouse wheel to scroll out or scroll in, or zoom in, I should say. I can also use the zoom controls over here. And what we see is the outline of the community that we searched for. So there's the outline of the city of Boise. And we're looking at a map of risk to homes with the scale relativized to the state of Idaho. And that's indicated by our legend over here. These are classes that are percentile breaks in our index of risk to homes. And I'm not going to get into the technical details of that too deep today. Next week's webinar is going to focus a little bit more on the data details. But I will point out a few things. So getting back to the use cases, Kelly talked about land use planners as being a primary audience for this. And this is a layer that we imagine land use planners would find a lot of value in. A typical use example of that, or one that we've imagined, is that if a land use planner is reviewing a permit application for a new subdivision, That gets at why we're showing this risk across the entire landscape and not just where homes exist now, because we can see, as we zoom in, we can see the street network. We can get a good sense for orienting ourselves within the city. But let's say we come out here to a place that has no roads, and there's a permit to build a new subdivision out here. If we were just mapping risk where homes exist now, we wouldn't have any idea of what the potential risk to a home would be in this place. But with the way that we've assumed that there's a home on every pixel on the landscape here, we're mapping what the risk to a home would be if it existed in a place. A land use planner can really evaluate when they're reviewing permit applications like that, what would the potential to homes be in that place. Here, there's a relatively high amount of risk, and so you might expect that they would require certain types of mitigations, put certain regulations and codes in place for homes that would be built there, or simply choose not to approve construction there and choose to approve construction in a place with lower risk. So that's a potential application of this wildfire risk to homes product. A few things I want to demonstrate about the map. You'll notice that I searched on a community and it zoomed me right to that community. Now, when I search a community or a county, I can zoom out, and I'm using my mouse wheel to do that. And as I zoom out, I'm going to give the map a second to catch up with me here. I'm going to reach a point where I can no longer zoom out anymore because I've searched at the community level. The map and the chart that have colors that are relative to the data within my state. And so they are percentile breaks within the state of Idaho. And so now I can't zoom out any further than this. I can zoom out to the full extent of the state, and you obviously can see a little bit of area around it that is still relativized to data within the state of Idaho. We did that intentionally because we want people to keep in mind that they're looking at data relative to their state. And I'll show then what happens if you go from viewing data at the state level, or like this when you've searched on a community or a county, to then viewing state data relative to the country. And so up here, when we search, we have little breadcrumbs going back to larger geographic areas. So I have county and state. If you watch the colors in this map, I'm going to change to making the search place be the state of Idaho. And you're going to see we're changing now from colors that were relative to the state of Idaho to colors that are relative across the entire United States. Now, Idaho got quite a bit redder because there's actually quite a bit of high risk area within Idaho. So the percentile breaks for just the state make it look as if the risk in some places is lower than when we relativize the scale across the whole country. I'll show another example of that on the other end in just a minute. But what you see now is, since Idaho is our search area, our chart changed so that now we're looking at a comparison of values across the state of Idaho with other states in the United States. And the dots now are population of the states. So this big one right next to Idaho here, which has a similar risk, is California with a lot more people, but they are in about the same range of wildfire risk. And so the other thing, once we've searched at the state level, we can continue to zoom out and we can get a broader, either regional or even national perspective. There you go. You can see it zooming out to the country. So that's our risk to homes layer, which again, I'm highlighting the potential use that land use planner may have there. I'm going to move to now some other views. And so you notice on the website, there are words across here that are links to other views. And so I'm going to search back into Boise. And notice my search bar is up in the top here now. I'm going to choose Boise City again. And we're going to switch back to those colors that are relative to the state of Idaho. And now I'm going to move to our next tab, which is exposure type. And let's see, there we go. Okay, so this map is telling us what type of exposure to expect if a home were to be located in any given place. And so the types of exposure that we are depicting are direct exposure, indirect exposure, and places that are not exposed to wildfire. So again, just to reiterate the terminology here, exposure is the spatial overlap between a place with wildfire hazard and the existence of the thing that we're concerned about wildfire risk for. And so in this case, that's homes. And again, our terms are highlighted here. So if we want to know what it means to be directly exposed, we can click on that. It tells us directly exposed homes may be subjected to wildfire from adjacent flammable wildland vegetation, as well as indirect sources such as embers and home-to-home ignition. So places that are shown in the sort of pinkish color on here are places where if homes are located there, they are embedded within a matrix of wildland fuels, natural vegetation, where we would expect that they could be subjected to direct flame impingement if a fire occurred there. Indirect exposure, on the other hand, are places that may be subjected to wildfire from indirect sources such as embers and home-to-home ignition, but not necessarily that direct flame impingement. So how did we get that measure? I'm going to zoom in here a little bit, and you'll notice my zoom in button gets to a point where I can't go any further. And that was intentional too, because as Frank noted earlier, we really intend this website and these tools to give you kind of the broad perspective, but not necessarily tell you what the exact risk or the exact situation is at any particular parcel. And so this is the finest scale that you can zoom into here, enough that you can identify the street network and neighborhoods. And here, in terms of thinking about this direct versus indirect exposure, it gives an opportunity to sort of highlight something that's unique about our project. And that is that when we do all of this mapping, the fire behavior modeling behind it that gives us information about wildfire likelihood and intensity is something that we can apply in places where we have wildland fuels. And so everywhere here that's shown as having direct exposure is mapped by Landfire in the Landfire fuel model layer as having a burnable fuel type. Everywhere else, including the indirectly exposed places, are mapped by Landfire as having non-burnable fuels. In the cases here, that's mostly the developed fuel model types, which are designated as non-burnable. But we know from a number of recent urban wildfire disaster situations that there is certainly some area around at least the fringe of a community, if not more, that is susceptible to damage from wildfire as a result of embers and home-to-home ignition and other indirect ignition sources. So they may not be embedded within the wildland fuels, but they still can be impacted by wildfire. And so what we've done is we've taken national wildfire simulation modeling that's done using the FSIM tool, and then taken the characteristics of fire behavior that come out of that, the likelihood and intensity estimates, and used GIS techniques, spatial analysis techniques, to spread those from the wildland into the developed environment up to a distance of 1 mile. And we looked at a few different options for that distance, tried to base it on what little research there is available right now that tells us how far into a community homes tend to be affected by wildfires. And so this orange area, the indirect area of exposure, extends approximately 1 mile or 1,500 meters from large areas of native vegetation into the developed environment. The reason that we feel like that's important for local fire departments and local fire collaboratives to understand is that it directs the type of educational message and the type of resources they might have residents use to mitigate their risk. And so somebody that has direct exposure to wildfire is maybe going to have different considerations than somebody that's got indirect exposure. And so we hope that that will be valuable for that purpose. While I'm here, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit and show that this is a metric that is really most valuable at that local scale. When I zoom out, you can see it's again showing the whole landscape, even in places where we don't have homes. And obviously it's not telling us much out in the middle of Forest Service lands or or particularly up in the Bob Marshall Wilderness up here. But when we're zoomed into a community, that's where this information I think really has the most impact. Just going to do a quick time check. So just to follow through that idea of resources that a local fire department might direct people to, I'm going to show how you can move among pathways here in the website. So on this Explorer tool, you'll always see this, how can my community take action and find ways to reduce risk. If I click on that, it's going to take me over to the reduce risk part of the website that is loaded with resources centered around these themes of risk reduction. So home ignition zone, home hardening, many others. If I click on one, the home ignition zone, for example, it's going to take me then into a detailed page that gives information about the elements of wildfire risk I can address by focusing on my home ignition zone. It's going to have a little bit of educational information about what that means. And in each of these, we've tried to embed a video here. We've got one of Jack Cohen talking about the home ignition zone and what it means. And then we have a list of community tools. These are links to programs that have websites and other resources that can help people with this particular type of risk reduction action. And so a number of websites listed here that people can tap into. And then on each of these pages, again, there's also a list of relevant research papers that can help people get more information. They're not meant to be exhaustive, but they're meant to be a springboard into the science and the literature if people want to know more. So that's just a quick overview of how that pathway and how people can navigate the website, how that can all work. Back into the Explorer tool, then going from the fire chief, I guess I'm also gonna, with that local fire chief or fire department, highlight that we have another view here that's showing wildfire likelihood. And so this is directly from that fire behavior modeling, again, with the spatial analysis techniques applied to spread that into the community up to 1 mile. We can see the likelihood of fire at any given location in a given year across the entire landscape. And we can see how our community compares to other communities across the state over here in our chart. So one thing about this is wildfire likelihood is on a scale that is not relativized by state or country. It's on a continuous or a standardized scale everywhere. These are log scale breaks, and so there's quite a bit of actual burn probability difference between the lowest classes of burn probability and the highest classes. But you can zoom out here to get a regional perspective again when you've searched at that community level. All right. So stepping into our last use example is elected officials. And this is an opportunity to talk about our fourth map view, which the map portion here simply has the community's outline with a plain gray background. But what is of use here potentially to elected officials is information that's taken from the Census Bureau's American Community Survey. And this is information that local leaders already have access to and may use in different ways. But what we've tried to do is make information here available at the community level that is relevant to wildfire preparedness. And so you can see we have statistics for any given community about the number of people and the percent of population in poverty, with disabilities, over 65, difficulty with English, households with no car, and mobile homes. And so those are all factors that local officials need to take into account when they're thinking about wildfire preparedness. And again, I'll jump over to the reduce risk. We have a topic on community health here, which could be very useful for local elected officials, public health officials to be aware of in terms of wildfire smoke, and thinking about the susceptibility of people, not just structures, when it comes to wildfire. And we have a number of resources and again, links to research related to that. Okay, I'm gonna come back over here to the website. And then the other thing I wanna highlight is that on all of these pages within the Explore portion of the website, there's a button at the top in this top menu bar to download data. And so if I go to that page, we have this download page on our website that gives a little description of the types of data that you can download: GIS data, tabular data. We have some national maps. I'll show a quick view of one of those if you just want to get a graphic to download and print. Here's a map of risk to homes for the country, and we're going to have more of those up there fairly soon. Right now, we just have risk to homes and wildfire likelihood. And we also have a paper on the methods used to develop all this. If I click on any of these buttons, it's going to take me to our data publication, which is hosted on the Forest Service Research Data Archive. And so here's that page. And when you get to this page, there's information that describes the data that's in here. We actually have 8 different raster GIS data sets included in our downloadable data. And in terms of the data access, there's this file index, which I'll just show you quickly. That gives you an idea of exactly what's going to be in any zip download file that you might choose to grab off of here. And so a short description of the 8 raster data sets available in the state downloads. And then we have a supplements download that has that methods paper. And I'm going to highlight quickly some of these tabular summaries that are available in here. So when you come here, all of that, the methods paper, the tabular summaries, support files like that are available in one zip file download here, these data publication support files. And then the GIS raster data are available by state in these individual state level zip files. They're quite large, and that's why we had to break it up this way. For users who are interested in the entire national data set, we do have that available upon request. Basically, I'll ship you a hard drive that you can send back to me. But let me just switch over real quickly to one of those spreadsheets. And here's the summary for communities. So we have these for communities, counties, and states. So this has a row for every community in the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii. There are over 29,000 communities in here. And I have several columns hidden in this for this demonstration. There are a lot of data fields in this. All the data fields in our downloadable tables have definition. So you can, if you download these, you can read what every single column in the table means and how it was derived. But I wanted to show you a quick use case where someone from a local municipality might want to compare how they rank up with other communities in their state. So we have all communities in the country here. Right off the bat, I'm going to go ahead and filter this, and I'm going to filter it to the state of Idaho, since that's what we've been looking at in our demo. Oops, I'm on communities. There we go. Here we go. That's what I wanted. So we're going to filter to the state of Idaho. Okay. And now we had that scatter plot a minute ago that was showing us, let's see, how communities ranked out in the state. So if I search this column here, and I'll describe it in a second, largest to smallest. So this is the mean risk to potential structures, which is another name for that risk to homes layer. We can see, again, like I talked about, it's the average risk within a community. So these small communities, small community of Elk City, Idaho, out in the middle of the Clearwater Nez Perce National Forest, has a very high average amount of risk. And so that's one way to look at it, and that's how it's ranked out within the scatter plot in our website. But you can also choose to look at the overall risk. So if you added up the risk across a community, so that's going to incorporate the number of homes that are at risk. You see now if I sort on that field, it's going to show me that the city of Boise has the most risk in terms of community-wide. It's got 88,000 housing units. And so here our bigger communities show up. And so officials may want to ask both of those questions, or a lot of different types of questions that you can get by filtering and sorting on different fields in these summary tables. So just a quick introduction to the data that are available there. Okay, and with that, I think I'm gonna pass it back over to our moderator in case we have a few minutes for questions.
Thank you, Greg. Yes, we have lots of questions, and actually Kelly and Frank have been both helping answer some of those in the chat window. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and put those in there right now. I asked Kelly and Frank to address a couple ones specifically that I think folks might be interested in. So whoever's ready to maybe tackle or summarize, I would love it for you to do that.
This is Frank. I'll go, Megan, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We had a couple of questions about the idea of exposure and indirect exposure. And one of the responses I typed in is that the science of indirect exposure is still evolving. In fact, we have one of the top researchers on the call today, but we wanted to demonstrate that it was a non-zero risk. It wasn't, that land fire shows it as non-burnable, and we know that's not the case. There are homes in that burn from indirect ignition. So we took a swag and we predicted a limit based on the research we had, and we projected the risk that was happening in the wildland fuels forward into the non-burnable community fuels. And the main purpose was just so we could show that it wasn't zero, and just to alert the community, hey, you got to be aware of this. But I think using the spreadsheets Greg just demonstrated, a community could customize it and say, okay, well, we think it's not what you said it is, but it might be this. And as research develops, I think we may be able to take a better pass at this in the future. You want to add anything to that, Greg?
No, I think that's a good explanation. You know, it is just really emerging science, and it's really just kind of a bit of a Band-Aid fix right now to what we know is a bigger problem, which is trying to figure out how to model wildfire within the urban environment, or within the built environment, I should say. And it's a real challenge, and the science behind it is there are a lot of people working on it. And so as we move forward, we may have better ways to estimate that wildfire exposure within the built environment. Right now, we just used a fairly simple approach based on the best available research.
I would add that we do have another webinar next week where we're going to try to have more time to get into these more technical questions.
Frank, another question.
Oh, go ahead.
Another question just came in that maybe you can address about whether and when more recent fire data might be integrated.
Yeah. This is one of the questions we get the most often. And we use the data that was most recent and available for all lands. But more data is coming. Landfire is working on a brand new version that'll be completed for all 50 states, probably by spring of 2021. And the census data is working on new data right now. So yeah, there'll be an opportunity to update this. The difference really will be on what level of interest there is for people to get this updated and what level of resource availability we have. So we'll be waiting to see if we have the budget to do this, but it certainly would be possible, I don't know, autumn of 2021 maybe.
Just a quick plug before Kelly goes into her next question. Somebody asked if this is available. I will put the link to it right now. It's available. It's being streamed live on our YouTube channel, so it'll be available as right now, basically. Please take the poll that popped up on your screen, and I'll pass it back to Kelly.
Thanks, Megan. So I just want to point out a couple questions that came up in the chat that I think are really helpful for folks to know. One is that just from a functionality standpoint, the tool and the website are not supported on Internet Explorer, so it's best viewed through Chrome or through Firefox or other modern browsers. There were also a couple of questions about using data for individual community questions or grant applications, or being able to compare communities across states, and using your own shapefiles like fire districts. And so we don't have the functionality yet where you can upload your own shapefile of fire districts. And if your communities aren't part of the census places, you won't be able to search for them in the Explore feature. But as Greg showed, you can download the data. So if you have GIS capabilities, you can download the data and overlay your own data. You can download the spreadsheets and compare communities. And we're always happy to chat with folks if you've got individual applications or questions. If you would like some kind of training or webinar for your local community or for the groups that you work with, please don't hesitate to reach out. Our email addresses are here on the screen, and you can always reach us through the website as well.
Kelly, I'm not sure if this question was addressed in the chat window, but Chris asked, how does this data complement or conflict with WRA portals that many states already have in place? And I apologize, I don't know what WRA stands for.
That's a great question. Frank, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I can do that. Jim Manakis tried to address this in the chat.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so the wildfire risk assessments that states have done or have been done at the regional levels, we're able to take a look at more values than just homes. We only used homes nationwide. So for one thing, they're looking at different value sets. They may have customized the response functions. They may have been able to update the data to be more recent. So there may be a number of differences between a wildfire risk assessment that's been done at say a state level and this one. That doesn't mean that either of them is more valuable than the other. Just understand that they were different. They were designed to answer different questions, and you should, whenever you're using a model, understand the assumptions that went into it and what the intent was when it was built.
Thanks, Frank. I'm wondering if anybody has any other questions that they'd like to put in the chat window. I think most of them have been addressed either through the chat or through this conversation here. Last chance to, okay, let's see. Somebody asked, do you have plans to fine tune this by incorporating vulnerable buildings, much like you have addressed vulnerable populations?
I don't know if that isn't a better question for next week.
Yeah, and that's a good plug for next week. I will put the link into our the chat window for next week's webinar. It's the same day or exactly a week from today, exactly at the same time. So please join us for the next webinar. And here it is. So make sure you register for that before leaving today and take our short poll that's up on your screen. Once again, thank you so much for all of our co-hosts that joined us today and our wonderful audience. This is a great resource, and we're in a huge support of it here at Landfire, and we really appreciate the time that you all put into joining us today. And yeah, we'll wrap up with that. And yeah, have a wonderful day, everybody, and thanks for joining us.